The air in the town hall was thick with the smell of old paper, stale tobacco, and the collective impatience of men who had better things to do. It was the smell of official business, a scent Adeline had come to associate with loss. First, the reading of her father's will, then her husband's. Now, the county auction of forgotten lands, the final dispersal of things no one claimed. She sat on a hard-back bench near the rear, a small, still figure in a grey dress that had seen better decades. Her hands, gnarled by 80 years of work, rested on the handle of a worn carpet bag at her feet. Beside her, a golden retriever named Jasper lay with a soft sigh, his head on his paws, his presence a silent, warm anchor in the shifting currents of the room. The auctioneer, a man with a booming voice and a waistcoat straining at the buttons, worked his way through the list of parcels. A quarter section of sun-scorched prairie. A dry creek bed. A plot of land so rocky it was said to break plowshares just by looking at it. Each sale was punctuated by murmurs, the scrape of chairs, the clink of coins. Adeline did not move. She was waiting. The room's attention was a tangible thing, a weight she felt but did not carry. She had been invisible for years, a widow, an elder, a relic. Her nephew, Thomas, had driven her to town, his face a mask of dutiful concern. "Are you sure about this, Aunt Adeline?" "It's just a list of useless dirt." He had patted her hand, his touch light, dismissive. She had not answered. Finally, the auctioneer cleared his throat. "All right, last lot of the day. Parcel 7B. Known locally as the dugout, a 1 acre, more or less, of worthless hillside. Title is complicated. Structure on property is considered condemned. We'll start the bidding at $5, just to get it off the books." A ripple of low laughter went through the room. The dugout. A place of folklore and failure. A half-remembered story of some eccentric who had tried to live in the dirt and vanished. $5 for a hole in the ground, someone called out, followed by another wave of chuckles. The auctioneer grinned. $5 it is. Do I hear 5? He scanned the room, his eye skipping right over Adeline. His gaze passed, then snapped back, his smile faltering. Adeline had raised a single, steady finger. The room went quiet. Not suddenly, but in a slow, spreading wave of disbelief. The laughter died in throats. Heads turned. Whispers started. "Is that old Adeline? What's she doing?" The auctioneer squinted. "Are you bidding?" "I am," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried in the sudden stillness. $5. A man in the front row, a rancher with a face like tanned leather, laughed out loud. "She's serious." The auctioneer, flustered, tried to regain control. "I have $5 from the lady in the back." "Do I hear 6? $6 for this prime piece of dearth." The room held its breath, waiting for the joke to end. No one spoke. The silence stretched. It was no longer amusing. It was awkward. $5 going once, the auctioneer said, his voice losing its boom. Going twice, he looked around, almost pleading. Someone had to save the moment, to bid against the old woman and turn it back into a comedy. But no one did. They just stared. "Sold," he mumbled, the word falling flat in the heavy air. "To the lady with the dog." For $5 the gavel came down with a dull thud, not a crack. It was the sound of an ending, not a victory. As the crowd began to stir, a low murmur of gossip replacing the silence, Adeline reached into her bag. Jasper lifted his head, whining softly, and nudged her hand with his nose. She simply stroked his ear, her touch deliberate and calm. The place no one wanted was now hers. The journey was a slow unwinding of the world she knew. Thomas had refused to take her, his face a mixture of pity and exasperation. "It's not safe, Aunt Adeline. There's nothing out there. Please, just let the county keep the $5. Think of it as a donation." He had tried to frame it as logic, but all she heard was fear, his fear for her, which felt like a judgment on her. So she hired a cart from the liveryman, a sturdy old mare and a boy too young to have an opinion. Jasper sat beside her on the buckboard, his golden fur a spot of warmth against the grey, dusty landscape. The town fell away behind them, its familiar rooftops shrinking into nothing. Then the scattered homesteads thinned, the fences vanished, and the land opened up into a vast, unforgiving expanse of sagebrush and stone. The road became a suggestion, two faint ruts in the dry earth. She remembered traveling a similar road with her husband, decades ago, when they were young and the world felt like a promise. He had pointed to the horizon, his voice full of plans. "We'll build here," he'd said. "A real house. With a porch. And a garden," but the years had passed, and the porch was never built. The garden remained a conversation. His plans were beautiful things, intricate and detailed, but they lived and died in the air between them, never taking root in the soil. He had left her a house full of his immaculate drawings, blueprints for a life they never lived. After he was gone, the silence in that house was louder than any noise. It was a silence filled with the weight of things undone. This journey was different. This was not a plan. It was an act. She held the deed in her lap, the paper crisp and official. Parcel 7B. The cart rumbled on, kicking up a fine white dust that coated everything. The sun beat down, relentless. The boy driving the cart chewed on a piece of straw, his eyes narrowed against the glare. "We're getting it close," he said, pointing with his chin. "See that rise? The one that looks like a sleeping animal? That's it." It didn't look like much. A low, unremarkable hill in a sea of them. As they drew nearer, she could see the feature that gave it its name. A dark rectangle cut into the hillside. A door. Nothing more. It was a place that did not announce itself. It hid. The cart pulled to a stop at the base of the hill. The boy looked at the door, then back at her. "This is it. You sure you want me to leave you here?" His voice held a note of genuine concern. "I am sure," Adeline said, handing him his payment. "Thank you." She climbed down from the buckboard, her movement slow but certain. Jasper leaped down after her, landing silently, and immediately pressed against her leg. She placed a hand on his head, a familiar comfort. The boy hesitated, then flicked the reins. The cart turned, its wheels groaning, and began the slow journey back the way it had come. Adeline stood and watched until it was just a small, dark speck, then nothing. The silence that descended was absolute. It was not the empty silence of her house in town. This was a living quiet, filled with the hum of insects and the whisper of wind through dry grass. Alone. Not lonely. Just present. She looked up at the door. It was made of thick, weathered planks, grayed by sun and time, set directly into the earth. There was no frame, no porch, no welcome. It was simply an entrance to the unknown. The place no one wanted. She took a deep breath, the air clean and tasting of dust and wild herbs. With Jasper at her side, she began the slow walk up the hill. The key was iron, heavy and cold in her palm. It had been given to her by the county clerk, fished out of a dusty box of forgotten things. "Goes with the property," he'd said with a shrug, as if handing her another piece of the joke. The lock on the dugout door was just as old, a large, rusted mechanism that looked like it hadn't been turned in a generation. Adeline fitted the key into the slot. It resisted, gritty with disuse. She put her shoulder into it, turning with a slow, steady pressure. For a moment, nothing. Then, with a deep, groaning complaint of metal on metal, the bolt slid back. The sound was unnervingly loud in the vast silence. She pulled the handle. The door swung inward on protesting hinges, opening a slice of perfect, cool darkness. A draft of air breathed out, carrying a scent she couldn't place. Not the damp, musty odor of a cellar. It was the clean, mineral smell of deep earth, of stone and stillness. Jasper whined, hesitant, peering into the blackness. "It's all right," she murmured, her hand on his back. She retrieved a lantern from her carpet bag, struck a match against the rough stone beside the door, and lit the wick. A soft, golden light bloomed, pushing back the shadows. She held it high and stepped across the threshold. A set of steep, narrow steps led down into the earth. They were not rough-hewn. Each step was carved from the rock itself, worn smooth in the center by the passage of countless feet. She descended carefully, Jasper following close behind, his claws making soft clicking sounds on the stone. At the bottom, she found herself in a single, large, circular room. The lantern light danced across the walls, revealing not rough dirt, but smooth, plastered earth, the color of pale clay. The ceiling was a low, graceful dome, a feat of engineering that made the space feel secure, not cramped. It was like standing inside a giant, hollowed-out vessel. Along one wall, a hearth and chimney were carved directly from the rock, the stone blackened by old fires. Shelves and niches were cut into the other walls, their surfaces empty but clean. A fine layer of dust coated everything, but beneath it, the place was immaculate. There was no rot. No cobwebs. No sign of intrusion or decay. It was a space that had been sealed and preserved, waiting. This was not the desperate hovel of a madman. This was intentional. Every curve, every line, spoke of care. Someone had spent years, not weeks, shaping this place. They had not just dug a hole, they had sculpted a home from the land itself. She ran her hand along the wall. The plaster was cool and smooth, like polished stone. It felt solid. Permanent. In the center of the room, a heavy wooden table and two simple chairs stood as if their owners had just stepped away. She set the lantern on the table, and its light filled the space with a warm, steady glow. The light did not flicker. The air was perfectly still. There were no drafts, no currents of wind from the open door above. Strange. She walked the perimeter of the room, her footsteps silent on the packed earth floor. She saw a small hook by the hearth, a neatly stacked pile of uncut kindling that had long since turned to silver, a broom of bound sagebrush leaning in a corner. These were the quiet ghosts of a life lived here. A life of order and purpose. She had expected to find ruin. Instead, she had found reverence. The world outside saw a hole in the ground. A joke. But down here, in the heart of the earth, was a secret testament to patience and will. A place built not to be seen, but to be inhabited. A belonging carved from bedrock. As her eyes adjusted to the warm lantern light, Adeline noticed details that defied logic. The air, while cool, was not the biting cold of a cave. It was temperate, comfortable. A subtle, constant freshness circulated, preventing the stillness from becoming stale. It felt alive. Her gaze fell upon a section of the plastered wall opposite the hearth. While the rest of the room was a seamless curve, this small portion was different. There was a faint, almost invisible vertical line, and the texture of the plaster seemed a fraction rougher, as if applied by a different hand or at a different time. She ran her fingers over it. It was solid, unyielding. But as her hand moved downward, near the floor, her knuckles brushed against something cold and metallic. She knelt, bringing the lantern closer. Set flush with the wall, almost completely hidden in the shadows, was a small, iron ring, no bigger than her thumb. It wasn't a handle. It was too small to grasp. It looked more like the head of a pin. Curiosity, an emotion she hadn't felt so keenly in years, took hold. She pressed on it. Nothing. She tried to pull it. It didn't move. She examined it again, the light glinting off its dark surface. It wasn't a pin. It was a keyhole. Not for a door, but for something small, like a lockbox. But there was no box. Just the unyielding wall. She thought of the heavy iron key in her pocket. It was too large. Then she remembered the auctioneer, the clerk, the dusty box of forgotten things. Had there been anything else? A smaller key, perhaps, overlooked. It was a question for another day. Her attention shifted. To the left of the strange keyhole, near the floor, was a series of small, deliberate holes drilled into the plaster, arranged in a simple pattern. They were vents. That explained the fresh air. But where did it come from? There was no corresponding opening to the outside that she had seen. The dugout was built into the side of a solid hill. She placed her hand over the vents. A slow, steady current of air flowed out. It was warmer than the air in the room. Warmer than it had any right to be. A warmth that came from deep within the earth. Jasper, who had been sniffing around the base of the wall, suddenly sat and let out a soft woof, his nose pointed directly at the nearly invisible seam in the plaster. He looked at Adeline, then back at the wall, as if to say, "Here." "I see it," she whispered to him. She stood up and pressed her ear against the plaster where he had indicated. She heard nothing. No, wait. Not nothing. A faint, deep hum. A vibration so low it was felt more than heard, a resonant thrumming that seemed to come from the very bones of the hill. It was the sound of moving water. A lot of it. Moving with force. An underground river? But that didn't explain the warmth. She stepped back, looking at the wall as a whole. The keyhole. The vents. The warmth. The sound. These were not random occurrences. They were pieces of a puzzle. The person who built this place had not just hollowed out a room. They had tapped into something. They had engineered a system, using the natural properties of the land to create a living, breathing space. This wasn't just a shelter. It was a machine. A quiet, earthen machine powered by the hill itself. And the locked wall was not a wall. It was a door. A door to the machine's heart. A deeper layer, hidden in plain sight. The weight of the discovery settled on her. The $5 joke had become a profound and complex mystery. The place no one wanted was beginning to feel like a place no one was ever meant to find. Returning to the town hall felt like stepping backward in time. The same clerk sat behind the same counter, his face a study in bored indifference. He barely looked up as Adeline approached. "Help you?" "I purchased parcel 7B at the auction," she began. "There was a key, I remember," he said, a faint smirk touching his lips. The hole in the ground, he had clearly dined out on the story. Adeline ignored the jibe. Her focus was absolute. The key was in a box. I was wondering if there was anything else in that box. Something small, perhaps overlooked. The clerk sighed, the sound of a man deeply inconvenienced. "Those boxes are filled with decades of junk. Deeds, receipts, unclaimed personal effects. It's a miracle we found the one key. Would you be willing to look?" she asked. Her tone was not pleading. It was a simple, direct request. It is important. Something in her quiet certainty seemed to penetrate his apathy. Or perhaps he was just curious to see how far the joke would go. With another theatrical sigh, he disappeared into a back room. Adeline waited, patient and still. Jasper sat at her feet, a silent sentinel. The clerk returned several minutes later, blowing dust from a small, flat key made of brass, now tarnished to a dark brown. It was attached to a frayed leather thong. "This was at the bottom, under some old papers," he said, dropping it on the counter. "Looks like a key for a journal or a small chest." "Thank you," Adeline said, picking it up. It was light, intricate, completely different from the heavy iron door key. She tucked it safely into her pocket. The journey back to the dugout felt different, charged with purpose. When she descended the stone steps again, the space greeted her not as a mystery, but as a promise. She went directly to the wall, knelt, and slid the small brass key into the hidden keyhole. It fit perfectly. With a gentle turn, there was a soft, satisfying click. A section of the plaster, about 3 feet square, swung inward without a sound, revealing a dark, hollow space behind it. It was a hidden compartment. Inside, protected from the dust and time, sat 2 objects, a small, sturdy lockbox and a leather-bound journal. She lifted the journal out first. The leather was supple, worn smooth with handling. It was not locked. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was feminine, a graceful, steady script. The date was from 40 years prior. "I have finished the main room," the entry began. "They called me mad for digging instead of building. They said a woman alone could not make a home in this wilderness. They do not understand. I am not making a home to impress the world. I am making one to escape it. A place that belongs only to the earth, and to me. Adeline's breath caught in her throat. She sank back, sitting on the floor, the open journal in her lap. She read on, turning page after page. The writer, a widow named Annalise, chronicled the creation of the dugout in meticulous detail. She had been a stonemason's daughter and had learned the trade from him, a skill everyone dismissed as unladylike. After her husband's death, facing a future of dependence and pity in a town that saw her as a burden, she had sold everything and vanished, just as the local folklore said. But she hadn't vanished. She had created. The journal explained everything. The smooth plaster was a mixture of clay, sand, and ash, a technique her father had taught her for ceiling cellars. The faint warmth and fresh air came from a deep, thermal spring she had discovered, venting its heat and steam through a clever system of rock channels she had carved behind the walls. The hidden door was her secret, the heart of her creation. She found the entry describing the lockbox. In this box, I have placed the deed to this land, and a letter. Should anyone ever find this place who understands its purpose, it is for them. It is not an inheritance of property, but of principle. The principle of quiet defiance. The right to be left alone, to be self-sufficient, to belong to oneself. Adeline looked from the journal to the smooth, curved walls around her. She was not the first widow to find refuge here. She was not the first to be dismissed by the world. The laughter in the auction hall echoed in her memory, but now it sounded different. Faint. Irrelevant. She had not bought a hole in the ground. She had inherited a legacy. The sound of a horse approaching was an intrusion, a violation of the dugout's perfect quiet. Adeline was outside, examining the clever, almost invisible intake vent for the spring system, half hidden by a thicket of sagebrush. Jasper heard it first, his head snapping up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. A moment later, a man on a fine-looking bay horse appeared over the rise. He was not a local rancher. He wore a city suit, a bowler hat, and an air of polished confidence that seemed entirely out of place in the rugged landscape. He reined in his horse a respectful distance away, tipping his hat. He said, his voice smooth and pleasant. My apologies for disturbing you. My name is Davies. I'm with the Transcontinental Railroad. Adeline said nothing. She simply stood, her hand resting on Jasper's head, quieting his growl. Her stillness was a question. I'm afraid there's been a small misunderstanding, Mr. Davies continued, dismounting with practiced ease. This parcel of land, 7B, was placed on the county auction list by clerical error. The railroad has had a standing interest in it for some time. We were quite surprised to learn it had been sold. He smiled, a practiced, reassuring expression that did not reach his eyes. Of course, we are prepared to rectify the county's mistake. And to compensate you generously for your trouble. He reached into his coat and produced a thick envelope. $500, he said, letting the number hang in the air. A handsome profit for a $5 investment, I'm sure you'll agree, $500. It was more money than she had seen in a decade. It could buy a comfortable room in a boarding house in town, meals she didn't have to cook, a life of ease. A life of waiting to die. Just then, a second rider appeared. It was her nephew, Thomas. He rode a swayback nag from the livery, and his face was tight with shame. He avoided her gaze, looking at Mr. Davies instead. Aunt Adeline, he began, his voice strained. Mr. Davies explained the situation to me. It's for the best. It's a mistake, Adeline repeated softly. The words were not a question. They were an observation. Mr. Davies's smile tightened slightly. Exactly. An administrative error. We're simply here to make it right. The land is of strategic importance to our expansion plans. He held the envelope out to her. Adeline looked at the envelope, then at her nephew's miserable face, then back at Mr. Davies. She did not look at the money. You're not offering me money, she said, her voice quiet but clear as a bell. "You're offering me a reason to leave." The smoothness vanished from Mr. Davies's face, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise. He had expected a simple transaction with a confused old woman. He had not expected this. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Auntie, please. It's a fortune." "Think of what you could do." "I am thinking," she said, her eyes still on Davies. She made no move to take the envelope. She simply stood her ground, a small, grey figure against the vast, empty land, proprietor of a place no one was supposed to want and everyone suddenly seemed to need. The silence stretched, the only sound the wind and the soft jingle of a bridle. Mr. Davies slowly withdrew the envelope, his expression hardening. The pleasant mask was gone. Now, it was just business. The next visitor was the town sheriff, a man named Miller whom Adeline had known for 30 years. He did not come with the easy confidence of Mr. Davies. He arrived in a dusty wagon, his face etched with reluctance. He held his hat in his hands as he spoke, his gaze fixed on a point just over her shoulder. "Adeline," he started, foregoing any formality. "Mr. Davies and the railroad, they filed a formal survey challenge." "A survey challenge," she repeated. "They're claiming the original survey from 60 years ago was inaccurate. They're saying this dugout, this whole acre, is actually part of the original railroad grant land. That it was never the county's to sell." He finally met her eyes, and she saw a deep well of apology in them. "They've scheduled a hearing at the town hall. Day after tomorrow. You'll have to appear." The railroad was no longer asking. It was using the weight of the law, the machinery of the state, to take what it wanted. A formal hearing. A room full of important men, legal documents, and a language designed to confuse and intimidate. It was a place designed to make someone like her feel small, powerless, and wrong. "I understand," she said. The day of the hearing, the town hall was even more crowded than it had been for the auction. This time, the mood was not mockery, but tense curiosity. Mr. Davies sat at a front table with a lawyer and a stack of maps covered in sharp, confident lines. Adeline sat alone on a bench, her worn carpet bag at her feet. Jasper was not allowed inside, he was tied to a post outside, waiting. Thomas slipped in and sat in the back, his face pale. The hearing began. The railroad's lawyer spoke at length, using words like easements, precedents, and eminent domain. He unrolled the new survey map, a stark, professional document that showed parcel 7B swallowed whole by a wide red band labeled TCR right-of-way. It was convincing. It was official. When he finished, the town council chairman, a man whose businesses all depended on the railroad, turned to Adeline. "Do you have anything to say in response?" All eyes turned to her. The silence was thick with expectation. They expected tears, or confusion, or a frail, rambling plea for pity. Adeline rose slowly. She did not approach the table. She stood where she was. She reached into her bag and took out not a deed or a legal paper, but Annalise's worn journal. "I am not a lawyer," she began, her voice steady. "I do not understand maps. But I understand this place." She opened the journal. "A woman built it. Her name was Annalise. She wrote this." She read from the page, her voice filling the silent room. "This is not a house of wood, which can be burned, or of glass, which can be shattered. It is a house of earth and stone and patience. It does not stand on the land. It is part of the land. It draws its warmth and its breath from the rock. It asks for nothing. It endures." She paused, letting the word settle. "The railroad says this land is of strategic importance." This woman, Annalise, she also believed it was of strategic importance. It was a strategy for survival. A strategy for belonging. When the world told her she had no place, she closed the journal. "You are not talking about a piece of dirt on a map. You are talking about a home. A home built by a woman this town forgot, bought by a woman this town dismissed. You say it was an error that it was for sale. Perhaps the only error is in believing it has a price." She sat down. The silence that followed was different from the one at the auction. It was not awkward. It was heavy with thought. Mr. Davies whispered furiously to his lawyer, his face a thundercloud. In the back of the room, Thomas watched his aunt, his expression no longer one of shame, but of dawning, uncomfortable awe. That evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the dry hills in shades of orange and purple, Mr. Davies came to the dugout alone. He left his horse at the bottom of the rise and walked up to the door, his polished shoes scuffing in the dust. Adeline was sitting on a simple stool she'd brought from town, watching the day end. Jasper lay at her feet. "No sheriff this time," she observed quietly. "No lawyers, no," Davies said. He stopped a few feet away, his suit looking rumpled and out of place. The quiet dignity of the landscape seemed to diminish him. "Your performance at the hearing was ineffective. You've made this a public spectacle." "Complicated things, I told the truth," she said. "Truth is often complicated," he countered, a hint of his old smoothness returning. He looked past her, at the dark opening of the dugout. "We know about the spring, Mrs. Thorne. The thermal spring. Our geologists have confirmed it. It's a significant water source, warm enough to prevent freezing in the winter. We need it for the new locomotive depot we're planning 20 miles down the line. It would save us a fortune in coal and construction." He had laid his cards on the table. This wasn't about a survey line. It was about a hidden resource, a natural engine. The secret heart of the dugout was also the secret to the railroad's future in the region. "Your public appeal to sentiment won't stop us," he said, his voice hardening. "We will win the survey challenge. It may take time, it may be messy, but the law is on the side of progress. And we are progress." He took a step closer. "But I am a pragmatic man. I am here to make you one final offer. Not from the railroad. From me." Personally, he produced the envelope again, but this one was different. Thinner. "This isn't $500. This is a bank draft for 5,000 $5,000. It was an impossible sum. A king's ransom. It was enough to buy the finest house in town, to hire a staff, to never worry about a single thing for the rest of her life. You would live like a queen," Davies said softly, pressing his advantage. "Comfort. Security. No more living in a hole. All you have to do is walk away. Sign the land over. No one will ever know you didn't lose the hearing. You'll be the clever widow who swindled the railroad, and I'll be the fool who overpaid. I'm offering you a comfortable ending to your story." Later that night, long after Davies had gone, leaving the offer on the table, Thomas arrived. He looked tired, older. He sat on the ground near her, not speaking for a long time. "He told me about the offer," he finally said. "I saw him in town." He's very confident. He picked up a loose stone, turning it over and over in his hands. "It's just money, Aunt Adeline. A lot of money. You could live anywhere. Be comfortable." His voice was searching, no longer trying to manage her, but trying to understand her. Adeline watched the first stars appear in the deep velvet of the sky. "Your granduncle, my husband," she said softly. "He spent his whole life planning for comfort. He drew pictures of it. He talked about it. But we never had it. Because comfort isn't a place. It's a feeling. It's the feeling of being in the right place. The one place you're meant to be." She looked at her nephew, her gaze clear and direct. "This is the right place." The next morning, Adeline sent word with a passing homesteader for Mr. Davies to meet her. Not in town, not at the dugout, but on the neutral ground of the county line, marked by a simple stone obelisk. When he arrived, he was alone and his face was confident. He saw the bank draft in her hand and a triumphant smirk played on his lips. Thomas was with her, standing a few paces behind, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Thorne," Davies said, tipping his hat. "A wise decision. I have considered your offer," Adeline said, her voice calm and even. She held up the bank draft. $5,000. "For my comfort." "For a quiet ending." "Exactly," he said, reaching for the paper. She did not give it to him. Instead, she tore it neatly in half, then in half again, the sound shockingly loud in the still morning air. She let the pieces fall from her fingers. They fluttered to the dusty ground like dead leaves. Davy stared at the torn paper, then at her, his face a mask of disbelief. "What is the meaning of this? Are you insane?" "No," Adeline said. The single word landed with the force of a slammed door. "I am not for sale. And neither is this place. You spoke of progress. You think progress is a railroad track. Annalise, the woman who built my home, she thought progress was a woman living on her own terms, beholden to no one. I find her definition more compelling." His face flushed with anger. "You will regret this. I will see you evicted. I will see that hole filled with dirt you can't," she said, a faint, wry smile touching her lips for the first time. "Because you don't own the land. And you never will." From behind her, Thomas stepped forward. He was holding a sheaf of papers. "Mr. Davies," he said, and his voice, though nervous, was firm. "While you were preparing your bank draft, I was in the county records office. I went back further than your surveyors did. I found the original homesteader patent for this territory, from before the railroad was even chartered." He held out a paper. It was a hand-drawn map, brittle with age. The thermal spring is marked on it. It was designated as a public water source, held in trust by the county for common use. It was explicitly excluded from the railroad grant. Parcel 7B was drawn around that exclusion. It was never yours. The county's clerical error was forgetting they owned it outright. My aunt didn't buy your land. She bought the county's forgotten responsibility." Davy stared at the map, his mind working furiously. He saw the old signature, the county seal. He saw his entire strategy, his leverage, crumble to dust. He was a man who used rules as a weapon, and he had just been defeated by a rule he had overlooked. He looked from Thomas's determined face to Adeline's quiet, unwavering gaze. There was nothing left to say. There were no more offers to make, no more threats to Levi. He had no more moves. Without a word, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away, a man defeated not by power or money, but by a history he had failed to read. As the sound of his horse faded, Thomas looked at Adeline, a profound respect in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Auntie. For not understanding. You understand now," she said, and placed a hand on his arm. "That's what matters." The sun was climbing higher, and the air was getting warm. It was time to go home. A year passed. The dugout was transformed. The quiet, earthen machine now served a life. Adeline, with Thomas's help, had carefully channeled a small portion of the spring's flow, bringing warm, fresh water directly into the house through a series of stone-lined pipes Annalise had designed but never completed. The warmth from the spring kept the dugout at a constant, comfortable temperature, cool in the blistering summer and warm through the biting winter. It was a self-sustaining ecosystem, a haven of permanence in a transient world. Outside, where once there was only sagebrush, a small, thriving garden grew. Adeline had found Annalise's list of hardy vegetables and herbs in the back of the journal, and she had planted them in the same spot, a patch of earth enriched by the mineral-rich water. The garden was a splash of defiant green against the muted tones of the prairie. Thomas was a regular visitor. He no longer came out of a sense of duty, but out of a shared sense of belonging. He helped her mend the old fences, not to keep things out, but to mark the boundary of their shared responsibility. He never spoke of the money of Mr. Davies or of the life she could have had in town. They both knew she had chosen the richer inheritance. The story of the old widow who had faced down the railroad became a local legend, told with a respect that had replaced the earlier mockery. People from town would sometimes ride out, stopping at a distance to look at the wisp of smoke rising from the hidden chimney or the impossible patch of green on the hillside. They didn't approach. They understood, instinctively, that this was a private place. They were no longer looking at a hole in the ground, they were looking at a landmark of quiet victory. This evening, Adeline sat by the hearth, the fire casting a dancing, golden light across the smooth, curved walls. The air was filled with the scent of drying herbs and baking bread. Jasper snored softly at her feet, his tail thumping against the packed earth floor in his sleep. In her lap lay Annalise's journal, open to a page near the end. Some will call this an empty life, Annalise had written. Alone in the earth. But they are wrong. It is not empty. It is full. Full of quiet. Full of work. Full of self. I have built more than a home. I have built a place where a soul can be at peace. Adeline closed the journal and placed it on the small table beside her. She looked around the room, at the steady glow of the lantern, the deep comfort of the hearth, the solid, embracing curve of the walls. The laughter from the auction hall was a ghost of a memory, a sound from another world, another life. She had not found comfort in the way the world defined it. She had found it in the earth, in the legacy of a kindred spirit, in the quiet dignity of a place that was truly her own. She was not a victor. She was not a hero. She was simply home. Finally, and completely, home.